remember?
I've had people walk out of me before.
I got pictures.
Yes, you do. Okay, we're coming back.
Video streaming at housefarms.com.
I don't care for you if it's a putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Puss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the show. Joining us right now from Kiev is our dear friend Philip Ittner, live in Ukraine. A lot of news coming out of there this week, and a lot of impact from the Russian attack on Ukraine and the rest of the world. Philip, they've been talking a lot about lately about how this is an American proxy war with Russia because we are supplying the Ukrainians with arms. When I would argue, and I'm curious your feeling about it, that Russia decided to have a proxy war with the rest of the earth using Ukraine as the pretext, essentially. That it was just it's a salami, it's like one of those big meat slicers in a deli, that they're like, this is the war we're going to have.
This is the argument that drives me absolutely up the wall because it presupposes that there is no agency within Ukraine.
Right.
And that's so condescending, and it's just so dismissive. Ukraine would have fought this war, and they knew it was coming. They knew it was coming for years, and they would have fought this war with or without the West's help. They were going to. This is a do or die situation for this country. A country that's been fighting for independence from a colonial power, which is what Russia is when it comes to Ukraine.
Right.
They have been fighting that war for at least 200 years, but arguably 5. So to say that this is Russia versus the West, or even more, that this is Russia versus America by proxy on Ukrainian soil, and that the West is willing to fight this war to diminish Russia to the very last Russian soldier's life or Ukrainian soldier's life, is just so dismissive and insulting to Ukrainians. It's like these are not puppets.
No, and as this goes on, it becomes I think increasingly clear as we continue to supply them with arms and the like, but not get in there, not actually go into the country. And last week, Biden had this basically this East Asian Economic Forum that they're putting together is sort of a non-trade trade pact, where they're just trying to line up all these countries together to push back against what China's doing, which included obviously some conversation about Taiwan. And Biden saying basically, we're going to defend Taiwan. That's the commitment we made. And people going, oh, that means we're going to throw soldiers in and battle the Chinese on the soil. That was never the commitment. We're just going to give them all the stuff they need to protect themselves, the same way we did with Ukraine. We would also hit China with sanctions like we have done, and China, importing 85% of their energy, 80% of their foodstuffs are even in more danger. And they don't have any of the gold buildup and other, outputs that they could. I mean, what are you going to sell? Plastic toys? Like, the world doesn't need that stuff the way they need grain and oil and gas. And that's what Russia has used as leverage to allow itself to maintain some level of stability. I want to know what your response was this week to Russia saying, well, we'll talk about, if they'll come to the peace talks table, we'll talk about releasing some of the grain to the rest of the world. The grain, by the way, they stole from Ukraine in a lot of cases. And held up 22 million tons of grain because there is a blockade in the Black Sea, so the Ukrainians cannot ship their grain supplies. Not to mention that a lot of the grain supplies are now being caught up in the fighting because this is now increasingly an artillery war, and so you're just indiscriminately bombing places with artillery, and you're hitting grain silos and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean this kind of stuff that's coming out of Russia of we'll go to the table if this precondition or that precondition. The Russians are feeling, I think I get the sense of the Russians feel that they are gaining ground, which they are,
in the East to a point where they might be willing to sue for peace. But
I have a theory about that.
yeah, so I have a lot more to say
Strategically.
about that.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there's going to be a counteroffensive. The Ukrainians definitely have the opinion that they're going to take every inch of ground back that was pre-2014. That means 1991 borders, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so this talk of we'll maybe release some grain supplies that, yeah, as you mentioned, much of which they've stolen from Ukraine. If Ukraine comes to the table, is not going to wash. And Ukrainians have said, I saw the stuff in Davos, and I saw what what's his name? Oh, terrible that I'm gapping on his name. I met him.
Pee Wee Herman.
Sorry?
Pee Wee Herman is what Jim.
Pee Wee Herman? No,
Yes.
I haven't met Pee Wee Herman. I have, however, met the Cold Warrior, Nixon's guy, opened up China.
Oh, Kissinger?
Kissinger.
Oh,
Yeah, the response to Kissinger's statement was just like, shut up.
yeah.
You know, that all these arguments that are being made to the Ukrainians that you have to give up something to Russia in order to end this war. Look, Ukrainians are more tired of this war than anybody on the planet. They're the ones fighting it. But they're not just going to bend over.
Well, because there is the issue that they have, I think, more than anything else, is that they've done that game before. We've seen this dance. We'll let you have this little territory. We'll call it quits right now, and we'll just pretend nothing ever happened. We'll just let you keep a chunk of our country. And that happened in 2014. The country as a whole was against that, hence the ousting of Yanukovych, Poroshenko, and then ultimately Zelensky, which was an absolute sign that they were for reclaiming that territory in the long term. They just didn't realize that Russia was going to do this specifically to kind of push it up, push up the timetable.
And also you have to understand the history of this country. They've been pushed around by Russia for centuries. And they're now in a place where they're like, you know what? No, you don't get to, even if it would be tactically or diplomatically or geopolitically smarter for us to do X, Y, or Z. And keep in mind, again, they want to end this war. They hate this war. But they are so sick and tired of being pushed around by anybody outside of their borders, and that's Brussels and Washington included, that they're like, no, you know what? No.
We'll make our own decisions.
We're not going to acquiesce to a violent aggression against us and then try to find some way of a negotiated peace that includes them.
And they have to be looking at the United States.
Violence.
They have to be looking at the United States with the idea that, at one point we were a small colony. We were only a fifth the size we are now, and we were squished between the British, the French, and the Spanish in a similar way. They kind of want to help us, but sometimes that's just so they can get something. And that, like early on, that's how that happened. That future is open to them as a possibility. I think the interesting thing about the Severodonetsk issue, which is where everybody's saying, Russia is starting to make grounds, is that there's effectively no one in that city. You don't have a situation like Mariupol where people are holding up. And it is effectively at the base of a valley surrounded by hillside, which is effectively drawing your opponent out into the open and just letting them have it. And giving them a target that they really want to go for, which means tracking all the big armaments across this open field, because past Severodonetsk, there are these rolling hills, where all the tanks and everything would be out in the open for a period of time if they decided to go for it. And so the idea is that they're slowly edging back. The Ukrainians are slowly edging back as the U.S. has been giving them more long-range weapons, and France as well. And then as soon as those either arrive or are fully implemented, just pelting the Russians as they try to create a stand.
Yeah, I mean, on that front, on that topic, I mean, we just heard two really important developments today in that already physically on the ground, they admitted that there are these U.S., I'm not going to go into military kind of nomenclature, but these self-propelled guns, the M109 howitzer system, which is a really good
Sounds to me like
self-propelled
military
gun, which just
nomenclature,
means
but I'm not one to call you out.
It's a smart rocket inside the howitzer, effectively.
and it's also
Oh, wow.
self-propelled, so you don't have
Yeah.
to dismount it and shoot it. It's a gun. It's an artillery piece on a tank chassis, so you can move it around and
Yep.
you can shoot and move quickly before they can respond. That was openly announced that they're already here on the ground,
Yep.
and there are whispers and rumors of whispers that the long range multi-launch rocket system, the HIMARS system, is finally going to be approved to get sent out here, and that will give the Ukrainians an advantage in distance. They can hit the Russians, and the Russians won't be able to hit them.
Well, right now,
that's going to be a big deal.
Even the U.S. howitzers that they're getting have a range about 8 miles further than the Russian ones do, because of the I don't know how many people know this, but it may be self-evident to some, but not to others. Howitzer barrels wear out. That a gun like that, it heats up, and then eventually it will crack if you use it and use it and use it and use it. These things don't just work interminably, and the quality.
And every round you fire leaves debris.
That's right, and the quality of the construction of them matters more than almost anything else. That's why there's a difference. This is why everybody, technically has a version of the howitzer, but in war, it really does matter where you get them from. And the Russian and the Chinese howitzers are terrible. While they, fire, 12 miles or what have you, and they are definitely devastating when they're being used, they last about a third the length of time the barrel does that the U.S. ones do. And we have given, according to this one source I've been watching online who kind of tracks the stuff that's going over there, we have given the Ukrainians more rounds than the barrels could ever handle. That's how armed they are. The Russians, on the other hand, have fewer rounds than they need, but more than their barrels can handle. So even if, and again, because of the sanctions and other stuff, they're going to need to replace those barrels. And that means melting down tanks in these giant foundries that they have, melting down old military equipment just to make barrels. They are being pushed back to World War I in their production. It's insane.
It's funny.
Yeah,
it's funny also because I was doing a favor for a Ukrainian journalist this week that I have become acquainted with, and he was asking if I could connect him with any of my contacts at the Pentagon. And I know a few guys that are at the Pentagon from my days in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I called up a really good contact and actually a good friend of mine at the Pentagon, who's a public affairs officer. And I said, look, would it be okay if I connected you two? Because I don't like to do that without prior approval.
Right.
And so in the brief conversation that I had with this contact of mine at the Pentagon, I said, this Ukrainian wants to talk about the weapons deliveries and how that's coming along and timetables and stuff like that. And in the brief conversation I had with my friend at the Pentagon, he said, one thing that you guys have to understand is we're taking these to the border, giving them to the Ukrainians, and then it's like hands off.
Yeah.
They decide what to do with them. They decide what target to do. They decide where to deploy them. They decide everything else. So that plays into this idea of agency as well. So, the argument that they're just a puppet of the West, we're giving them weapons and then going, it's out of our, you guys conduct the war. And that's what they've wanted. And so, I think the Russians, while they're making slow progress, and as you mentioned, it might be a double-edged sword for them because they are being drawn out into the open. We also have to consider at some point there's going to be a counteroffensive, and clearly the Ukrainians are preparing for that.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. The Russians are being drawn out into the open currently around the sort of the plains area of the western the
just off
northwestern.
of the Dnieper River, just
Right.
kind of northeast of the Dnieper. There's a whole stretch of land there that's pretty wide and open.
Yeah, and the problem that they have versus that, they already had a problem bridging these other. We have to take a break. I went way over the break on this. Let me take a break and we'll come back. We got more with Philip Ittner and your questions too. If you're in the chat room and you want to post a question, Johnny Million will keep track of them. Thanks, Media Brad. I almost missed the break, but I'm on it. We'll be back right after this. We'll have a short one in the next one, and then we'll take some of the questions too. We'll be back. It's Hal Sparks Radio Program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back to the Hal Sparks Radio Program, Mega Worldwide.
Welcome back to the show. Live with us from Kiev, Ukraine. Philip Ittner is there, and we were talking before and we'll take some questions from the chat room, either on Twitch, twitch.tv/Hal Sparks, or on YouTube for people who might have a question about what's going on over there, what his experience is, and the like. I have been looking at the sort of tangential effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the damage caused, in many ways, like the kind of rolling damage caused by the spread of COVID from its initial spread within, the Hubei province in China out into the rest of the world. That there are all these geopolitical and economic impacts that are ripples from this drop in the pond, and a lot of attention has been paid to grain and grain prices in certain areas and how that's affecting, like the fact that India is now no longer allowing grain to be exported because they don't have enough for themselves. So it's so funny. They were importing from Russia and exporting some of their own because of the price differential, and now they're not able to do any of that. And that's happening in a lot of places, to the point where that impact is so strong that Imran Khan in Pakistan was deposed effectively. He was, he had a vote of no confidence in his government, and is now threatening that unless they hold a new election, he's going to have millions of his people attack the capital. This is, that's not good. They're a nuclear power as well. And this is, you could directly tie this to some degree to COVID, but very much to the impact of Russia deciding to have this war of choice on with Ukraine and the ripple effects that it's caused. And more and more, I'm sure you've been watching Russian media monitor a little bit occasionally.
Oh yeah,
Philip. So
whatever. Thank goodness for Julie Davis.
Julie Davis is fantastic. If you don't know, follow her on Twitter @JulieDavis. She watches Russian television, so you don't have to, and then translates it and posts clips online. And it's where we,
if you think having to monitor Fox News is bad, boy, she's doing saintly work.
It's brutal for even have to
brutal.
Yeah, and all the threats that we're seeing about them threatening to use tactical nukes or threatening the entire world, because right now the conversation isn't NATO expansion. That lie went out the window a long time ago, because obviously Putin literally came out and went, I don't care if Finland and Sweden join. Oh, well, then obviously it wasn't about strategic stuff. You just want the land and the stuff. You want the oil and gas. You want the the grain fields. You want the control. And that this week they literally said, this will end with Russia destroying Ukraine and winning the whole place. Which, by the way, increasingly, even with their alleged peace deal offerings, that's not on the table at all. But even with that, it's either going to be they wipe out all Ukraine as an identity, or it's going to be devastating for the entire world.
Well, the Ukrainian. Here's the problem. Here's a problem that is going on as well, is that the more belligerent Russia becomes with this kind of talk. Remember, they share a common language. Ukrainian increasingly becoming the prevalent one here. But they
Right.
understand each other perfectly well. So they know exactly what the Russians are saying. And so the
Yeah.
more the Russians say stuff like, we need to destroy the concept of our Ukraine, that they are an independent, every time they say that, the Ukrainians are like, well, okay, then what choice are you giving me here?
Right.
So when the international community comes to them and says, you got to give Russia a little something, something, they're like, have you not been listening to what these people are saying? They
Well,
want to destroy us.
And that's
as
the
an
Kissinger
identity.
thing. That's the Kissinger thing. So
Yeah.
Kissinger was basically making the 2014 argument, and people are going, either you haven't been paying attention, or you frankly don't care that international business stability and profit making is so important to Henry Kissinger that if it means the elimination of the Ukrainian, as every human being that identifies as Ukrainian from the face of the earth, Kissinger's like, well, it's a thing. And by the way, some of our favorite faux-aggressive friends who we have spoken of before, and like the one whose name shall not be mentioned, they
Makes me so angry.
Yes, they have been agreeing with Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
They've been floating this idea. Never mind the fact, by the way, that does not entail, well, let them have Luhansk and Donetsk and Crimea and call it a day and they'll leave it alone, because there's no indication they're ever going to. The Russians have said so much. There's no intention on their part to do anything of the sort, and that every even peace negotiation is a break that helps the Russians at this point. The only side in this that benefits from a temporary ceasefire is Russia, and not because they ever intend to actually go through with the ceasefire, but specifically so that they can regroup and attack harder. They need a break. That's any peace deal that they would offer right now, and the Ukrainians know this, is simply calling a timeout while they sneak around the back. That's all it is. And anybody who thinks otherwise is either brutally naive or conniving right along with them.
Yeah, there's two things about that really make me frustrated and angry. Not to fixate on the gentleman that you're referring to, because the only time I listen to what he says is when you review it. Because I don't listen to it. But I know that there are others of the same ilk, or in that horseshoe of extremists, as the right gets extreme and they circle around, and the faux left extreme and the right extreme kind of come to that common ground where they talk about, Ukraine being filled with Nazis. I can't believe that narrative still exists.
Right.
This place is flooded with media, and where are the Nazis? They're all over the place. We've been here for months, and if this place was a Nazi regime, don't you think that we would have seen it by now and shown it to the world?
Right.
But secondly, I just want to reiterate something that so I went through this process this week of renewing my status within the country to allow me to stay for another 3 months.
Right.
And during that period, I was reviewing what it is I'm doing here, why I'm here, what I want to be doing, and is this the right thing for me to do, or should I go get a little bit of rest and relaxation and come back? And I was talking to a lot of Ukrainians about this whole thing, about we've been through so much, do we keep going, or do we need to recharge our batteries? And the Ukrainians that I speak to, mind you, they come from a different perspective because this is their home, but they are saying to me, we are exhausted as well. We are so tired of this war. We hate this war, but we're not going to leave this war behind us and to finish this war prematurely on somebody else's terms when it is not in our best interest to do so would just be a betrayal of everything that we have already been through. So as hard as it is for us to take this to the final step and get to where we feel we should be, which is really, they do have the mentality here. I have to tell you guys, they have the mentality here of, as bad as this is, as horrible as this is, Russia has to be defeated wholeheartedly. They have to be taught that they can't conduct themselves in this way. And if they're the ones that have to do it, they're ready to do it. Because they know that if Russia, and Putin in particular, is not taught You can't do this. You can't do this to Ukraine. You shouldn't be able to do this anywhere, but you certainly can't do it to my country, the Ukrainians are saying. And so they're like, we are done with war. We are so tired of this. It has been more taxing on us than anybody else. But we will not finish until we teach the Russians they cannot push us around. They cannot take what is
and they're
ours
the only thing,
by force.
They're the only, we got to take a break, but they're the only thing standing between Russia doing this to Moldova, doing it to Poland at this point, feeling like they
Or
take
just
another
having
bite,
the
bite out of
just having
Finland.
the general opinion that they can throw their weight around without any repercussions.
And it dooms Chechnya and Georgia to even more brutal expansion after the fact, because they're gonna come down harder on the parts of Chechnya and Georgia that did not and do not side with them. So we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. What is it?